If you survive the night, I'll spare you. The Alpha growled. The Omega left him speechless. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Elena Whitmore stood where the torchlight thinned and the stone floor cooled beneath her shoes, the kind of quiet that pressed against the ears settling over the hall as if the walls themselves were listening. She had learned that silence could be heavier than noise. Across from her, Caleb Blackthorne did not move. He did not need to. Power lived in the stillness of his shoulders, in the way the air seemed to hold its breath around him. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled, not loud, not rushed, a statement rather than a threat, as if the outcome were already decided. If you survive the night, I'll spare you. The words traveled the length of the hall and landed on Elena without striking her down. She did not flinch. She did not bow. She simply lifted her chin a fraction, enough to show she had heard him, enough to show she understood what everyone else already believed, that survival was unlikely. Around them, eyes flickered away. No one volunteered to meet her gaze. Elena had worn that look before, the look of being chosen not for merit but for convenience, the look of being counted as expendable. She had grown up learning how to take up less space, how to soften her steps, how to keep her voice steady even when it trembled inside. Tonight, those lessons settled into her bones like a second spine. Caleb watched her for a beat longer than necessary. He expected pleading. He expected fear. What he saw instead was restraint, the careful gathering of resolve that comes when a person decides the shape of their own ending. Elena breathed in, slow and even, the way she did when the world narrowed, and there was only the next moment to manage. She did not ask what the trial would be. She did not ask for mercy. Questions were a kind of currency, and she would not spend what she did not have. The hall seemed colder, or perhaps it was simply quieter now that the sentence had been spoken aloud. A path opened where none had been marked, and Elena stepped forward because standing still would have been its own kind of surrender. As she passed, whispers tried to form and failed, dissolving into the hush of anticipation. Caleb's eyes followed her, not with triumph, but with a curiosity he did not yet recognize, as if something in the order of things had shifted by a degree too small to name. Elena reached the threshold and paused, just long enough to place her palm against the door, grounding herself in the grain of the wood. She did not look back. She did not need to. Whatever waited beyond the night would meet her on her feet, because that was how she intended to face it. Elena Whitmore had learned early that being overlooked could be a form of survival. Long before the hall of stone and torchlight, before the Alpha's measured voice set the course of her night, she had been the girl people forgot to count when they divided resources and favors. She was not loud, not striking in the ways that demanded attention, and in a world that rewarded presence, she had mastered restraint. She grew up at the edge of rooms, at the end of lines, waiting for permission that rarely came. It was easier that way. Expectations were heavy things, and no one placed them on an Omega who did not seem built to carry them. She worked where she was told, kept her head down, and learned how to listen. Listening taught her more than speaking ever could. It taught her which silences were safe and which ones meant trouble. Tonight's silence was different. It carried a charge, like the air before a summer storm, and Elena felt it settle along her arms as she crossed the threshold, and the door closed behind her with a sound that was not loud but final. The corridor beyond was long and narrow, the kind of passage built to move people along rather than invite them to linger. As she walked, she counted her steps without meaning to, a habit from childhood when counting was a way to keep fear from spilling over. She did not know where she was being taken, but she knew this much: she would not arrive by accident. Every turn had been decided before she took it. The knowledge steadied her. Choice, when it appeared, was a gift. When it did not, dignity became a discipline. Elena held on to that discipline now, letting her breathing find an even rhythm, letting her shoulders stay loose. She had been told once that fear made people smaller. She did not intend to shrink. Somewhere behind her, a presence lingered, not close enough to be felt, not far enough to be gone. She did not turn to confirm it. She understood the weight of being observed, and she refused to perform. The night ahead had been framed as a test, but Elena knew tests could be misunderstood. Survival was not always about strength or speed. Sometimes it was about attention. Sometimes it was about choosing the right moment to stand still. She remembered a winter when supplies ran thin and arguments ran thick, when she had learned to share quietly and speak plainly, and how those small choices had kept peace when force would have failed. Those lessons had shaped her more than any ceremony ever could. As the corridor opened into a space washed with cooler air, Elena paused just long enough to set her feet, feeling the solid ground beneath her shoes, feeling present in her body. Whatever the Alpha expected from her, it was not fear that would deliver it. If there was a night to be endured, she would endure it awake, aware, and unbroken, carrying herself as she always had, with the steady resolve of someone who had learned that worth was not granted by rank, but proven by the way one met what came next. The place they brought Elena Whitmore to was not dramatic in the way stories like to exaggerate. It was simple, exposed, and honest in its indifference, an open stretch of stone and earth where the walls pulled back and the sky pressed closer, making the night feel larger rather than contained. Cool air moved freely here, carrying the faint scent of pine and clean rock, and Elena understood immediately that this was not a place meant to punish but to reveal. There were no instructions waiting for her, no rules written into the ground. That, she realized, was the point. She stepped forward until the corridor fell away behind her and stopped where the ground leveled, letting her eyes adjust to the dim light. The moon was not full, but it was bright enough to outline the shapes of the land, bright enough to remind her that time would move whether she wished it to or not. Somewhere beyond the edge of sight, the pack went about its routines, confident in the order of things. Elena did not feel watched so much as measured, as if the night itself were curious what she would do with the hours given to her. She set her feet shoulder-width apart, steady, and chose a place to sit where the stones still held a trace of warmth from the day. She did not curl inward. She kept her back straight, her hands resting loosely in her lap, posture calm rather than defensive. Fear would tighten her muscles and waste energy she could not afford to lose. She had learned that lesson during long days when work demanded endurance rather than strength, when patience carried her farther than force ever could. The wind shifted, brushing against her hair, and she tucked a loose strand behind her ear without thinking. Small movements grounded her, reminders that she was still in control of her body, still present in herself. Minutes passed, then more. She did not count this time. Counting would turn waiting into an obstacle, and she did not intend to let the night feel like an enemy. Instead, she listened. The night spoke in subtle ways, in the rustle of distant branches, in the soft change of temperature as clouds drifted across the moon. Elena welcomed those details, letting them anchor her attention. She thought of the Alpha then, not with resentment, but with clarity. Caleb Blackthorne had offered her a condition, not a guarantee. Survive the night, he had said, as if survival were a simple switch that could be flipped by will alone. Elena understood something he might not have considered. Survival was not always loud. It did not announce itself. Often, it looked like stillness, like restraint, like choosing not to meet provocation with reaction. She rose after a while, not because she was restless, but because standing reminded her of her strength, quiet though it was. She walked the perimeter slowly, memorizing the ground. Beneath her feet, noting where the stone dipped and where it held firm. Awareness was a kind of armor. When she stopped again, she faced the open sky, shoulders relaxed, breathing steady, as if she belonged here, as if this night had been hers all along. Somewhere beyond the darkness, a presence lingered again, attentive now, no longer distant. Elena did not acknowledge it. She did not need to. The night was unfolding exactly as it should, and she intended to meet every hour with the same calm resolve she had carried into it. As the night deepened, time began to stretch in unfamiliar ways, each minute feeling both brief and endless. And Elena Whitmore discovered that fear did not arrive all at once, but in quiet waves that tested her focus. The temperature dipped another few degrees, cool enough to sharpen her awareness, and she adjusted her stance, rolling her shoulders once to keep them loose. She refused to hunch against the cold. She had learned that the body listened to the mind, and she would not teach hers to retreat. Sounds carried differently now, clearer and farther, the soft creak of wood somewhere distant, the low hush of wind sliding along stone. None of it threatened her, yet all of it reminded her that she was alone with the hours ahead. She welcomed that truth. Loneliness was not the same as helplessness. She had been alone before in rooms full of people, overlooked and underestimated, and she had survived that too. Elena walked again, slow and deliberate, tracing the edge of the open ground, letting her eyes adjust to shadow and shape. She noted where moonlight pooled and where darkness gathered, learning the space as if it were a language she could read. Awareness steadied her pulse. When she stopped, she closed her eyes briefly, not to escape, but to listen inward. Her breathing was even, controlled, a quiet anchor. Fear tried to speak then, not loudly, but persistently, offering images of exhaustion, of doubt, of a dawn that might never arrive. Elena acknowledged those thoughts without following them. She had learned that fear grew when it was argued with, but softened when it was seen and set aside. She opened her eyes and fixed her gaze on the horizon, where the sky was darker, the stars faint but present. Somewhere beyond that line, morning waited, patient and inevitable. The realization brought a subtle warmth to her chest. Time, she knew, was not an enemy. It was a current. You either fought it and tired yourself out, or you learned how to float. Elena chose the latter. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, grounding herself in the simple fact of standing, of existing in this moment without apology. A memory surfaced uninvited, a day when she had been told she was not enough, that her place was behind others, always behind. She remembered how she had nodded then, how she had carried the words quietly and let them shape her. Tonight, she allowed herself to set them down. Whatever the alpha believed about her, whatever the pack expected, those were not truths she needed to carry. Her worth was not on trial, even if her endurance was. The wind picked up slightly, brushing against her sleeves, and she welcomed it, lifting her face to the cool air as if it were a companion rather than a challenge. Somewhere beyond the open ground, a presence shifted, attentive, closer now. Elena sensed it without looking, a change in the night's texture rather than a sound. She did not tense. She did not react. If she was being observed, she would be observed as she was, calm, aware, unafraid to be seen. She took a measured breath and held it for a count of 3, then released it slowly, letting tension drain from her hands. The night had not broken her. It had not even bent her. As the hours continued their quiet march forward, Elena remained where she was, steady and awake, meeting the darkness not with defiance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who understood that survival was often decided long before the sun ever rose. The night reached its deepest point when the moon slipped behind a thin veil of cloud and the light softened, and it was then that Elena Whitmore noticed something small and out of place near the edge of the stone. At first she thought it was a trick of shadow, the way the darkness rearranged familiar shapes, but when she stepped closer she saw it clearly, a fragile bundle caught where stone met earth, trembling more from exposure than fear. It was nothing dramatic, nothing that would impress an audience hungry for spectacle, just a small creature drawn to warmth and finding none. Elena knelt without hesitation, careful and unhurried, lowering herself until she was level with it. She did not reach out immediately. She knew that sudden movements startled the already vulnerable. Instead, she let her presence announce itself quietly, a steady breath, a calm posture, patience made visible. The creature stilled, sensing her attention, and Elena felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the pull she had always felt toward what was overlooked. She slipped off her outer layer and placed it gently nearby, creating a barrier against the cold without crowding the space. It was a simple choice, almost inconsequential, and yet it mattered. She sat back on her heels, watching, letting time do its work. The night did not object. The wind eased, just slightly, as if acknowledging the small pocket of care she had created. Elena stayed there longer than she needed to, longer than logic demanded, until she was certain the creature had settled, warmth found, fear eased. Only then did she rise, moving with the same deliberate calm she had carried all night. She felt lighter for the act, not because she expected gratitude, but because it affirmed something essential about who she was. The trial had never been about enduring discomfort alone. It was about choice. Somewhere beyond the open ground, eyes watched more closely now. Caleb Blackthorne had expected endurance to look rigid, defiant, perhaps even reckless. What he saw instead unsettled him. He saw restraint paired with compassion, strength expressed through care rather than dominance. It was not what he had prepared himself to witness. Elena returned to the center of the space and stood, hands relaxed at her sides, gaze lifted to the sky as the clouds began to thin. She did not look toward the shadows. She did not perform. The moment had not been meant for an audience. It had been meant for her. The hours continued to pass, marked by subtle changes in the air, by the slow return of starlight. Elena felt fatigue touch the edges of her awareness, a gentle heaviness rather than a threat. She adjusted her footing and remained standing, choosing alertness over rest, presence over collapse. She thought of how often kindness was dismissed as weakness, how often it was treated as a liability rather than a measure of courage. Tonight had reminded her that kindness, when chosen freely, required a steadiness few possessed. As the clouds parted and the moonlight strengthened again, Elena felt a quiet certainty settle into her bones. Whatever judgment awaited her at dawn, it would have to account for what the night had revealed. She had not hidden. She had not hardened. She had met the darkness without losing herself to it. Somewhere in the distance, a breath caught, unintentional, unguarded. The Alpha did not speak. He did not move. For the first time since the trial began, he found himself uncertain of the conclusion, and that uncertainty lingered, sharp and undeniable, as Elena stood beneath the thinning night, unchanged, unbroken, and quietly resolute. From the shadows beyond the open ground, Caleb Blackthorne remained still, a figure shaped by restraint rather than impulse. And for the first time in years his certainty did not arrive on command. He had intended to observe from a distance, to confirm what he already believed about trials and outcomes. But the night had complicated that intention. Elena Whitmore had not filled the hours with desperation or spectacle. She had not tested limits or begged the darkness to spare her. Instead, she had inhabited the space with a quiet authority that did not ask permission. Caleb found himself tracking her movements without meaning to, noting the way she paced with intention, the way she chose stillness when others would have rushed, the way her attention moved outward rather than inward. It was not fearlessness he saw, but something rarer. It was composure under uncertainty. The realization unsettled him more than defiance ever could. He had built his rule on clear lines, on cause and effect, on the belief that pressure revealed truth. Tonight, pressure had revealed something he had not planned for. When Elena had knelt earlier, when she had offered care without expectation, something had shifted. Caleb had felt it then, a brief tightening in his chest that he had dismissed as cold air. He could not dismiss it now. He understood strength. He recognized endurance. What challenged him was the way she carried both, without hardening. He watched as she stood again beneath the thinning clouds, posture relaxed, gaze lifted, not searching for him, not performing for judgment. She behaved as if the night were a shared environment rather than a battlefield, and that perspective reframed everything. Caleb had spent years teaching others to endure him, to survive proximity to his authority. Elena did not endure him. She simply existed, and in doing so, she exposed the limits of the test itself. The thought followed him, unwelcome and persistent. If survival was assured by cruelty, the world would look very different. He shifted his weight, a subtle movement that would have gone unnoticed by most, but to him it marked a threshold crossed. He was no longer a distant observer. He was invested, not in the outcome he had declared, but in the question the night now posed. What did it mean to spare someone who had never been broken in the first place? The hours pressed on, and with them came a quiet reckoning. Caleb realized he was waiting, not for failure, but for dawn. He had not done that in a long time. When he thought of Elena now, it was not as an omega placed into a trial, but as a presence that altered the space around her. He did not move closer. He did not announce himself. He let the night continue its work, even as his assumptions loosened their grip. Authority had always come easily to him, obedience even more so. Respect, he knew, could not be demanded. It had to be earned or given freely. Watching Elena, he understood that respect could also be reflected back, forcing the one who held power to examine its shape. The sky lightened almost imperceptibly, the darkest hours giving way to a softer blue, and Caleb felt the weight of decision settle into his bones. Whatever words he had prepared for Dawn no longer fit. Whatever judgment he had planned felt incomplete. Elena remained where she was, steady and awake, as if she had been waiting not for mercy, but for recognition. The distinction mattered. As the night loosened its hold, Caleb exhaled slowly, aware that when he finally stepped into the open, he would be changed by what he had seen, and that knowledge, once gained, could not be set aside. The first light of dawn arrived without ceremony, a gradual softening of the sky that Elena Whitmore felt before she fully saw it, a subtle warmth easing the edge of the cold air and signaling that the longest hours had passed. She had not slept. Her body carried the quiet fatigue of wakefulness, but her posture remained steady, her awareness clear. When the horizon shifted from deep blue to pale gray, she allowed herself a single slow breath, not in relief, but in acknowledgement. Morning had come because mornings always did. She turned her face toward the growing light, letting it touch her features, grounding herself in the simple truth of having endured. Around her, the open ground looked different now, less imposing, more ordinary, as if the night had lent it significance that daylight gently reclaimed. Elena took a few measured steps, stretching her legs, rolling her shoulders once to ease the stiffness that had settled there. She did not rush. Survival had never required haste. The world beyond the clearing stirred, distant sounds returning as routines resumed, but no one entered the space yet. It was as if the dawn itself paused, holding the moment open. Elena stood with her hands at her sides, palms relaxed, gaze forward. She did not look for approval. She did not anticipate judgment. Whatever came next would meet her on equal footing, because the night had already given her its answer. Footsteps reached her then, unhurried, deliberate, approaching from behind and to the left. Elena sensed the presence before she turned, a familiar weight that no longer pressed down but stood level with her own. When she faced him, Caleb Blackthorne was closer than he had been all night, the early light outlining his features without softening them, revealing an expression that was not cold, not stern, but unreadable. He stopped a few feet away, far enough to respect the space she occupied, close enough to acknowledge it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was different now, no longer charged with uncertainty, but steady, expectant. Caleb's gaze moved over her with careful attention, taking in the details he had not allowed himself to see before, the calm in her eyes, the way she held herself without defensiveness, the absence of triumph or resentment. He had expected exhaustion to claim her posture, fear to linger in her expression. He saw neither. Elena met his gaze evenly, neither challenging nor yielding, simply present. The morning light caught in her hair, and for a brief, inexplicable instant, Caleb felt as if the night had been a question posed to both of them, not just her. He had no prepared words left. The declaration he had made hours earlier echoed faintly in his memory, stripped now of its authority by the simple fact standing before him. Elena had survived, yes, but more than that, she had remained herself. That truth demanded a response he had not rehearsed. The pack would expect a verdict, a clear line drawn between consequence and reward. Caleb realized that what mattered more was recognition. Elena waited without impatience, her breathing slow, her shoulders relaxed, as if she trusted the moment to unfold without force. The trust unsettled him. It also clarified something he had avoided for years. Power did not always speak first. Sometimes it listened. The sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched and softened, and in that light, the trial ended not with a proclamation, but with an understanding that settled quietly between them. Elena had crossed the night on her own terms. Dawn found her standing, awake, unbroken, and seen, and the realization left Caleb momentarily without speech, aware that whatever came next would not be a return to what had been, but the beginning of something reshaped by the hours they had just survived. Caleb Blackthorne broke the silence at last, and the sound of his voice in the open air carried differently than it had within the stone hall, stripped of ceremony and sharpened by honesty. He did not raise it. He did not posture. He spoke as one who understood that volume would add nothing to meaning. Elena Whitmore listened without lowering her gaze, attentive but unguarded, the way one listened when there was nothing left to prove. Caleb took a measured breath, the kind he used before issuing commands that shaped lives, and found that the words he had prepared no longer belonged to him. They fell away, replaced by a simpler truth that demanded fewer syllables. He acknowledged the dawn with a glance, then returned his attention to Elena, as if the rest of the world could wait. He told her she had endured the night. He did not frame it as a concession. He named it as a fact. The distinction mattered. Elena felt the weight of the hours settle into her muscles, not as weakness, but as evidence, and she accepted his words with a slight nod, neither triumphant nor diminished. Around them, movement stirred at the edges of the clearing as others gathered, drawn by the end of the trial and the promise of resolution. Caleb did not turn to them. He remained facing Elena, and in doing so, he shifted the center of attention without announcement. He asked her how she felt, a question that surprised him even as it left his mouth. It was not customary. It was not expected. Elena considered for a brief moment, honoring the question with the care it deserved, then answered plainly. She said she was tired, and she said she was steady. The simplicity of her response struck him harder than any plea could have. Caleb found himself searching for words again, aware of the eyes now watching, aware of the weight of precedent. He had spared others before. He had rewarded survival before. He had never paused like this. He spoke again, slower now, and acknowledged what the night had revealed. He said that endurance alone did not explain her survival. He said that awareness, restraint, and choice had carried her through. He did not use the language of mercy. He used the language of recognition. A murmur rippled through those gathered, not loud enough to interrupt, but present, the sound of expectations adjusting. Elena remained still, receiving his words without letting them define her. She understood that recognition, once given, could not be taken back, and that it changed not just the one who received it, but the one who offered it. Caleb felt that change settle into him, unfamiliar and unavoidable. He addressed the others then, turning just enough to include them without ceding the moment. He stated that the trial was complete. He stated that Elena Whitmore stood by her own merit. He did not embellish. He did not threaten. He let the morning carry his meaning. When he turned back to Elena, his expression had softened in a way few had seen, not into warmth, but into clarity. He told her she was free to choose her next steps, that no claim would be placed upon her without consent. The words landed with quiet force. Elena felt something loosen in her chest, not because she had been granted freedom, but because it had been acknowledged as hers all along. She met his gaze and thanked him, not with deference, but with respect returned in kind. For a moment, Caleb found himself with nothing left to say. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of what had been learned. The Alpha, known for certainty, stood speechless before an Omega who had crossed the night without losing herself, and in that stillness, the balance of the world shifted, subtle and profound, as the day claimed its place. The clearing slowly filled with quiet motion as the pack resumed its rhythm, but the space between Elena Whitmore and Caleb Blackthorne remained untouched, as if an invisible line held it apart for one final moment. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the stone beneath their feet, and with that warmth came a sense of beginning rather than ending. Elena felt it in the way her shoulders eased, in the way her breath no longer carried the night with it. She had been seen, not as a symbol or a test, but as herself, and that recognition lingered like a steady light. Caleb turned slightly, acknowledging the others with a brief gesture that dismissed ceremony without diminishing authority, then faced Elena once more. He spoke again, quietly enough that the words belonged to her before they belonged to anyone else. He told her that the path ahead was hers to choose, but that his door would remain open should she wish to walk through it. He did not frame the offer as protection or reward. He framed it as respect extended. Elena considered him, not with suspicion, but with thoughtful clarity. She understood the weight of what he was offering, not as a promise, but as an invitation grounded in consent. She answered that she would walk her own way for now, that she wished to see where her feet carried her in daylight, guided by the same awareness that had carried her through the night. Caleb accepted her answer without disappointment, and in doing so, affirmed the truth of his words. He inclined his head, a subtle acknowledgment that did not go unnoticed, and Elena returned the gesture, equal in measure. As she turned to leave the clearing, she felt no urgency, no need to escape. Each step was deliberate, confident, her pace unhurried. The pack watched her go, some with curiosity, some with quiet respect, all aware that something fundamental had shifted. Elena moved beyond the open ground and onto the path that led toward the wider world, the sounds of morning growing fuller with each step. Behind her, Caleb remained where he was for a moment longer, the image of her steady composure lingering in his mind. He realized that the night had not been a test of survival after all, but a mirror held up to his rule, reflecting possibilities he had not allowed himself to consider. He turned away at last, carrying that realization with him, knowing it would shape decisions yet to come. Elena reached the edge of the path and paused, glancing back once, not to seek validation, but to mark the moment as complete. The clearing lay bathed in sunlight now, ordinary and transformed all at once. She felt no bitterness toward it, only gratitude for what it had revealed. With that, she continued on, the morning unfolding before her, open and unwritten. Somewhere behind her, a presence followed at a respectful distance, not in pursuit, but in acknowledgement, the bond between them not claimed, but recognized, a quiet thread of understanding woven by endurance, choice, and the courage to remain gentle in the face of power. The day moved forward, carrying both of them with it, changed in ways that could not be undone, the night behind them not as a threat survived, but as a promise quietly fulfilled.